What is good, you guys? This is Steven with All Talk On, and I finally have finished my $400 streaming/gaming PC. So I've been sick this last week, so it took a little while to get this together. But yesterday, as recording this video, I did do a live stream on the PC. The live stream lasted about like almost 3.5 hours or so. Overall, great experience, worked just fine. It was fun. I had a few people in there. We were talking, something I might do in the future as well. We were just chit-chatting about PC parts and stuff. But we'll go ahead and jump over to the $400 build, and we'll rush through the parts real quick so I can start showing you guys the performance, as well as I'm going to be downloading the live stream from YouTube and showing some clips of that so you guys can see what the temperatures and CPU utilization, as well as the clock speeds on the GPU and stuff like that. So the first part we'll go through is what jumped off the entire build. It was a part I found on OfferUp. It's an app kind of like LetGo, which is more of a verified version of Craigslist, if you will. But I found a motherboard, a X58 motherboard by Gigabyte GA-X58A-UD3R-rev-2.0 for $35, and I saw that and I was like, you know what, this motherboard for $35 is a steal. We can definitely do something with it. Sure enough, we did do something with it. But this motherboard just is jam-packed with ridiculous amounts of features, even for it, or well, definitely for its time, but even to today's standards. Has a whole bunch of PCIe slots, 6 RAM slots for triple channel memory setup, nice VRMs, good heat sinks on the north bridge, as well as 10 SATA ports, 4 of them being SATA 6 and USB 3.0 on the rear panel. There are no USB 3.0 front panel, but besides the fact, $35 for this motherboard was an absolute steal. The next part I picked up was a GTX 1070 by Zotac. It definitely seemed like one of the cheaper models you could buy, but a 1070 is a 1070. I was able to grab this bad boy for $190, which is what definitely brings this build together as a higher end system, because a GTX 1070 is not a slouch, especially when it comes to 1080p gaming, and can even easily handle 1440p as well. But we're going to be sticking to 1080p in this because I have a 1080p monitor and I didn't feel like hooking up to a 1440p monitor, and it just seems better with a $400 build that you would much rather want to max out 1080p, because I mean a 1440p monitor generally is going to cost as much as this PC almost at times. There have been a lot of sales for around $200 to $300, but a good 1440p monitor is going to cost well over this PC build. So we're going to stick to 1080p for this, for all of the gameplay and all the settings, as well as the streaming. It's all 1080p, but it is completely maxed out settings because you have a 1070. Why not max it out? Next up is the CPU. It is an Intel Xeon X5650 6-core 12-thread at 2.6 gigahertz base clock. And I'm not sure what the boost clock is on this. Maybe it's 3 gigahertz or something, or maybe 2.6 is the boost. I didn't really look into it because I was planning on overclocking it anyways. Has 12 megabytes of L2 cache, and overall this is a beast of a CPU for how cheap you can find these. So this is a LGA 1366 socket CPU, which is fairly old, but because they are fairly old, you can pick these things up for around $10, $15, $20. I was able to get it for $9.99 plus $4.99 shipping, so $15 total. We'll go ahead and round that up. And I was able to overclock this thing to 4.1 gigahertz, and I'll show you guys the voltage and the stuff like that, but also overclocks the RAM when you overclock this, so just be aware of that. But 4.1 gigahertz was achieved easily. The temperatures stayed within the 40s and 50s while gaming, while that is using a higher end cooler than I'm going to recommend here. And I'll go over why that is when we get to the cooler. But overall, this thing can be at 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 3.9, 4 gigahertz easily on air. These CPUs run surprisingly cool for the 6 cores and the 12 threads. As you guys will see when we get to the stream and the benchmarks and stuff like that, I'll have the numbers in there. Next up is the memory. Now this is one of the harder things to get for these builds because memory still is not that cheap. So we're only going to go for 12 gigs because any more and you're looking at way too much money. But this system, I did put 36 gigs of RAM in it. It says it only supports 24, but apparently you can easily break that by just putting more than 24 gigs of RAM. I had it up to 36, which makes me think you could probably do 48 with 6 8-gig sticks, but you might even be able to push it further than that because the Xeon X5650 does support more than 48 gigs of RAM. It actually supports a lot more than 48 gigs of RAM. though I don't know if the motherboard would allow you to do that, but I know that this motherboard and CPU combo would definitely handle 48 gigs of RAM, which is a bit insane. We don't need that. We went for a set of Kingston 12 gigabyte RAM. It's 4 gig kit. It's DDR3 1600 megahertz. It's unbuffered memory, pulled probably from a workstation PC that was built. It doesn't say that it's ECC, but usually when you see the U in there, it's unbuffered. I'm not sure. I know it's not registered memory. I did try to put registered memory in the system. If you guys saw the other video where I said I bought a test stick, the ECC registered memory does not work. It failed to boot when I put the stick in there, which is understandable. Nowhere in that motherboard does it say it would support registered memory, but if you see anything, as you can see up here, it's a PC3L12800U. That U is unbuffered. So if you see a U in there, that usually means that it's going to be unbuffered and it will work with this system. If it is a 12800R, if you see an R at the end of there, that means it's probably registered memory and it will not work. That's one of the easy ways to tell, because finding RAM for these builds are pretty tough, because you want to find the cheapest that you can. Usually that's going to be stuff from old workstation PCs, which a lot of times end up with registered memory. So just make sure you're buying the right memory, otherwise you'll waste your money. So we were able to get this for $40.31. We'll go ahead and round it up for $41. Free shipping, just your standard 4 gig sticks at 1600 megahertz, which we do have running at around 1866, 1870 megahertz after the overclocks. And I'll show you guys the timings and stuff that I used on those as well when we get to that portion. Up next is the hard drive. I was able to pick this up off of eBay along with CPU. You guys will see the eBay listings. The CPU, RAM, all this stuff was bought off eBay. Western Digital, Caviar Black 1 terabyte, 7200 RPM. Was able to pick it up for $18, free shipping. Now this hard drive is noisy. It's not the fastest. It's an older hard drive, but it had no bad sectors. It's running just fine. It was able to install all the games, and for $18, it's cheaper than an SSD. As much as I would love an SSD in the system, it just seemed better to get one of these than it would be to try and squeeze in, an extra $30 if you want to put an SSD in there. But I'm trying to keep it under $400. Or at $400, so we're gonna go with this $18 7200 drive. It's gonna do the trick. It's 1 terabyte. Next we have the case. The case is a Raidmax Zeta series Zeta BO4 black steel plastic tempered glass, whatever. It's a Raidmax Zeta. It's BO4 I guess series Zeta BO4. I don't know how they name it, but it's a tempered glass Raidmax case. It was one of the cheapest tempered glass cases I could find, and that is what I wanted. It does have a white LED fan in the back. I don't really care about the fan, but it was $39.99 on Newegg, so that was the cheapest tempered glass case I could find. You could definitely go cheaper than this case. They had ones for $24 and stuff that are just, your standard ATX case that you might see on a pre-built system or something. But I did want the tempered glass because it's tempered glass. It's not a gaming PC if it doesn't have tempered glass. Let's put it like that. But there was tax on this, but I did buy the power supply as well with Newegg, so the tax is kind of combined. And I'm not going to do the math to figure out how much tax went to this. So the next part up is the power supply, which is a Coolermaster Master Watt Lite MPX 500. It's 500 watt power supply. It was $30.72, so $31 plus tax. Free shipping from Newegg as well. It's refurbished. It's 500 watts. It'll get the job done. Coolermaster doesn't make terrible power supplies. I've been using it just fine. Overclocking the crap out of the system, still works just fine. So our total tax for both of these products was $5.83. So we'll go ahead and round it up as a total of $77 for the case and the power supply. So if you notice, I didn't include a cooler, but that's because I already had a cooler that I was using. So our total build so far comes up to $376 right here on Amazon with free shipping, $23.28. It's a Coolermaster Hyper T4. So this is basically the older version of the 212 Evo. It's still got 4 copper heat pipes. It's still got a nice fin stack, and definitely, in my opinion, I think Coolermaster makes some of the best fans that they put on their heat sinks and water coolers. Not a fan of Corsair fans, but I think Coolermaster definitely makes some amazing fans. They're one of the few brands where I don't mind using the stock fan on their heat sinks and on their water coolers. A lot of these other brands like Thermaltake and Corsair, I usually end up replacing the fans because I don't like how loud they are and I don't think they push enough airflow. always love Coolermaster. So this is air cooled, and it will definitely fit the socket 1366. It'll fit pretty much, I mean, any socket out there. They usually fit these for. I'm not sure about AM4 though. I'm not sure if they updated this one, but either way, $24. This will keep the thing cool. With the water cooler I have on the CPU right now, it stays in like the 40s and 50s, like at 4.1 all the time. It maybe bumps to the 60s, and it's even through Cinebench and stuff. So even an air cooler will definitely keep you in line. A lot of people usually put air coolers on these things. Like I said, I just have the water cooler laying around, so I'm not going to buy another cooler when I got one I can use. But this will keep you there. There's YouTube channels out there that'll show you guys hitting 4.5 gigahertz on an air cooler. So definitely a good cooler for the price, $23.28, so $24, which puts us at an exact $400 price mark for this PC. And we have 12 cores, or 6 cores, 12 threads, sorry about that, and a GTX 1070 and 12 gigs of RAM, not 16 gigs, but you know, triple channel memory, why not? So that's definitely the specs that you would assume for a high-end PC, but we are definitely using older parts when it comes to the CPU and the motherboard, and even the 1070 has been replaced nowadays. So what is the performance like on this bad boy? So hopping into the performance, we are on the newest driver. As of literally yesterday, I updated its version 4.17.01, game ready driver from NVIDIA, and our clock speeds on our GPU, I believe we went about 50 megahertz on the clock, 100 megahertz on the memory, and just maxing out the sliders to give it a little more power and temp limit. Now that's a very, very modest overclock. Like, we're not doing anything heavy. We're just basically giving it a little bit of a bump to keep it in a little bit of a higher clock speed than it would maintain stock. Other than that, it's a pretty simple overclock that anyone can get on a 1070. Like I said, this isn't the best 1070 as far as cooling and anything like that, but then again, it also still stayed fairly cool, fairly quiet. It was actually a very good card for how cheap it was. And then for our CPU, we are at 4.1 gigahertz, 4.144, at about 1.36 volts, and we are at 1866 is what the RAM is showing at, and I did adjust my timings on that. We put it to 10, 11, 10, 28, which is what I found to be stable, and usually what I always set RAM at for 1866 is roughly that, unless the RAM is rated for better timings and better speeds. But because this one is 1600 megahertz memory, we're going to go ahead and use the 10, 11, 10, 28. And I believe that's a TRAS of 2 as well. For our first benchmark, we have TimeSpy. I believe it's like 1440p or something like that. Whatever the default presets are when you run the benchmark, when you open it up in 3D Mark, we ran that. We got a total combined score of 5,765, which is definitely not too bad for how old this PC is. Our graphics score seems to be about 5,975, and our CPU score is 4,812, which gives us a total of 5,765 for our combined score, which places us around like the 50% mark, I guess, around of PCs. When I click compare our results online, it's like you're about 55% or whatever it is, which is fine. That is definitely a respectable score for this PC. We can definitely get away with that. Up next is our Cinebench score. We have a 955, I believe. It's hard to read that. I believe it's a 955 score on our Cinebench. Once again, it's respectable. It's not crazy good or anything, but we are dealing with a very old CPU. Even at 4.1 gigahertz, it's still not going to contest with something like an 8700K. But when it does come to multi-core, multi-threaded applications, we can definitely see pulling ahead a little bit of things like the i7-4770K, as well as the 3770K. Once again, those aren't the most current gen CPUs, but those quad-core 8-thread i7s don't seem to be able to hang with this thing when it comes to the multiple cores that this thing has at 4.1 gigahertz. Now maybe if you overclock that 4770 like 4.5, 4.6, then it might take away from this. But overall, like I said, 955, it's a fairly respectable score for how old of a CPU that we are dealing with. So the first game we're going to be testing today is Ark Survival Evolved. Now this game is literally just set to the high preset, and then I just turned off motion blur because I can't stand motion blur. But this does have the ground clutter sky quality actually turned up, not all the way for some of them, but some of them are maxed out. but that's just the preset. If you do turn these sliders down, you'll definitely get a better frame rate. But this game overall is just it doesn't run that well, especially at the base that I'm at. We have a lot of random dinosaurs just walking around, a lot of lights and turrets and stuff, so the frame rate hovers around the 60s to the 80s, but like any PC, even with a 1080 Ti and a 8700K, if you go to the wrong spots on the base and you just drop to 20 FPS, that's just standard. There's literally nothing you can do about it in this game. But overall, as our frame rate is, like I said, when you get around stuff, you're seeing it drop to the 20s and 30s. That's just arc. But generally, we're getting around a 60 to 80 FPS in this game, which is actually very good, very playable. And like I said, that's on the high preset with the ground clutter and the sky quality turned on. Turning those off would definitely help out frame rate because that just tanks it. Hopefully the art devs work on this game a little bit more, which I don't think they're going to work that much more on performance on this thing. I think this game's just always going to run like crap. But overall, very playable experience for Ark Survival Evolved. Up next is Grand Theft Auto 5. Once again, 1080p. This game is completely maxed out. MSAA, Reflection MSAA, all the sliders have been turned completely all the way up. And we're just running through the story mode, and I'm a very terrible driver, so I'm crashing into a bunch of different things. But we are running at around 60 to 70 FPS. Now, we could definitely get some of that FPS back if we turn off, like, just simply turning down the MSAA. But because this is a 1070 and I really wanted to stress this out, I wanted to see how far we could go with it. And like I said, 1080p maxed out completely, still hitting around the 60 to 70 FPS mark. Very, very nice, very playable. Up next is PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds. This game's not as popular anymore. Well, I think it still is, but Fortnite, I guess, has been taking over. But quite honestly, I don't like Fortnite. I don't even have it. I'm not going to buy it. So, not going to be testing that game ever. I'll use PUBG. If you ask me, PUBG is probably a little bit harder to run and probably less optimized. The game definitely runs a lot better than when I first started playing it. And we'll definitely see that here. We're completely maxing the game out. 1080p. The only thing that's not turned on is like motion blur, because I can't stand motion blur, and I feel that most people can't stand that. But we're still hovering around the 80s to the 100 FPS in this game. It's extremely, extremely nice frame rates. And also, this is while the same settings I used while streaming. So when we go through the stream part of it later, you guys will see it's the same settings. I kept them completely maxed out and streamed as well. But we're, like I said, 80s. 100 FPS. That's extremely playable in this game, especially for, you know, a competitive type shooter game. You're definitely going to want a little bit higher frame rates, and you could definitely lower the settings and go up a little higher than this. But like I said, why not stress the living crap out of the GPU? Because you got a 1070, might as well max everything out, right? Next up is Tomb Raider. Now, I believe this is Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider, because I accidentally installed the wrong one, and I wasn't going to go and redo it. I was supposed to install the newest one, the Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but I accidentally installed the Rise of the Tomb Raider, and so we're just going to use this as the benchmark. It said it doesn't really matter. I guarantee you the system will run all of these other games that I didn't test, like the new titles like Black Ops or Battlefield. It's going to run all these titles just as well. It's not going to make a difference. Honestly, you could kind of judge the performance of a PC off of only one or two games, as long as they're you know, heavier games. You don't really need a whole suite, but it's always nice to include the suite. But this is, I believe this is the Rise of the Tomb Raider. Like I said, installed the wrong one, and because I'm not going to sit there and install it again, because it takes forever to install all these games onto a PC just to benchmark them. But we're sitting at a 123 FPS is the Mountain Peak. This is for the benchmark that they have, the built-in benchmark minimum 23, max of 209, don't really care about those. The Syria part, we're at 96 FPS, minimum 24, max 137, and then I can't even pronounce that, Geothermal Valley is 98 FPS, 56 minimum, 151 for the max, and the overall score gives us 108 FPS. Very respectable. This is completely maxed out as well, at 1080p. With motion blur off, because once again I cannot stand motion blur. So we'll go ahead, and there's a little bit of live gameplay because I didn't really want to do the benchmark suite. I just did it to give us like that that kind of show. But for some reason the FPS counter isn't working in this game through the Steam, so we don't have an FPS counter. I wasn't going to load up fraps or anything, but you can just see the gameplay smooth. Like the gameplay, it's completely maxed out, so you can see everything's all shiny. Her hair looks like it's okay. It's not doing anything too crazy like in the first Tomb Raider, but the game definitely looks really good. maxed out, and then it's extremely smooth, extremely playable. Like I said, it's always nice to show you guys the live, like, it's one thing to capture it, I guess, with a capture card, but recording the monitor really shows you, because you would be able to see the screen tearing, you would be able to see the skips and stuff like that. The numbers don't show you that kind of stuff. You would be able to see things like I said, random lag and freezing, as well as some stuttering, or maybe even, like I said, heavy tearing. But as you can see here, it's extremely smooth. Obviously there's no VSync on, but we're not getting any dips, as you can see below, definitely not below 60. It's definitely keeping it nice and high for us there. So very smooth, very nice, very playable, maxed out 1080p Tomb Raider. Sadly not the newest one, but I guarantee you it would run roughly the same on the newest one too, so I don't think it really matters. So up next is Overwatch. Now this game is kind of my my little, I guess, my Dota or my Counter-Strike, because I do play this game quite a bit. So I rock the settings completely all the way at low at 1080p, and we are hovering around the 250 to 300 mark. The game caps out at 300. But I did notice that every now and then you get a random dip to like around like 220, 200, 220, but it wasn't too often. But yeah, like I said, all low settings, everything turned all the way down. And the reason for that is because, like I said, I like to have the max amount of FPS in this game, because I do like to play it a little more competitively than I play other games. It's like I said, it's like my Counter-Strike and like my Dota. So you could max this game out too. I guarantee you it'll run just fine maxed out. It's a 1070, it'll handle it. But running it at lower settings definitely shows us where our FPS is going to be as far as the limit of the CPU. Like I said, the game limit is 300. We're not really hitting that, which is showing that the CPU could definitely be faster. But that game also isn't really requiring a whole bunch of threads, which we have. We just don't have the single core performance that game would probably want for the 300 FPS. But overall, still playable, even at a very competitive. Most people cap their frames under 200. I don't. I just let it run rampant. So Overwatch, lowest settings, 1080p, very playable. I would say around 250 FPS average is what I would judge that at. I didn't run any benchmarks. I'm just showing you guys the live benchmarks because I like that better. Last but not least, we have the stream. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys my stream settings. The video bitrate 3500, and we are doing an output scale of 720p, 60 FPS, capture scale of 1080p. Everything else is basically set to your default inputs, like the CPU usage for the encoding and all that stuff. It's not set to high or very fast or anything. It's literally just set to default, so it uses whatever it uses when it loads up. So 3500 bit rate, we're putting out a stream at 720p, 60 FPS, capturing 1080p. Ran perfectly smooth. In fact, I could not tell the difference if I was streaming or not. It made absolutely no difference, at least any difference that I could tell. And the stream went through without a hitch. There was no drop frames, there was no stuttering, perfectly fine. It's actually kind of a ridiculous experience that we were having on like I said, a $15 CPU. Though I will say the motherboards can definitely get a lot more expensive than what I paid for, which is why it makes this platform in some ways not worth it, because the motherboards can run pretty high prices. But if you can find one of these X58 motherboards that are capable of overclocking the CPU, if you can find them for, you know, 40 bucks, even $50, this is what makes them a steal, is getting one of these 6-core 12-thread CPUs and overclocking the living crap out of it. Because like I said, the streaming performance right here is a little insane. So as you can see in the stream, we are staying at around the 40s mark, maybe the very low 50s, and that is while running PUBG completely maxed out, as well as streaming. Our CPU utilization, you can definitely see some fairly heavy usage on some of the cores, especially the first core. You'll see you're hitting around 50 to 60%. The overall processor use is at around 33 to 35, but you're definitely going to see some cores hopping up there, but some are still staying low. It's definitely cool to see all of them being utilized for the most part, all of them hitting 20, 30, 40%, but you can definitely see that the first CPU core is taking the brute force of all of this. So that is at 4.1 gigahertz. As you guys can see, I also did a bunch of overlays on the stream. The stream wasn't just the game. I had it capturing CPU ID window to show me the temperatures and cores on the stream, as well as capturing MSI Afterburner to show us our GPU temp and our clock speeds, as well as it's capturing the ADA 64 CPU ID to show us our voltage and our CPU speed. as well as I have the text on the screen saying, you know, gaming PC and showing the specs. So there's actually a lot of layovers on this, and I actually have all of these windows. You have to keep them up and running in the background if you're capturing them, otherwise they won't update live. So it's not like it's just streaming the game and that is it. There was, like I said, a bunch of programs running in the background. Not to mention I had like 4 YouTube tabs open, for one for, you know, the live dashboard, and one to monitor the stream for the chat as well, stuff like that. There were like a couple tabs open there for monitoring other stuff. So there was a lot of things going on this one PC while it was streaming, and as you can see, it is handling it just fine. I couldn't even tell I was streaming. I was still hovering in the 80s, 90s, 100 FPS mark. It did not really care one bit that it was streaming, and that's 1080p maxed out, streaming at 720p 60 FPS with all of the layovers. So for $400 overall, this thing is a steal. So now we come to our conclusion, and the conclusion that I'm going to come to is that for $400 this thing is absolutely worth it. I mean, you could start a YouTube channel, you could start your streaming, you could even just be a high-end gamer just for fun. The 1070 is definitely not a slouch. I mean, obviously it's not a 2080 Ti, but it's definitely going to max out every game, especially if you're on a budget. Chances are you're not going to have a 4K or 1440p monitor. Chances are you're going to be rocking a 1080p monitor, which this will let you max every game out pretty much at 1080p. You'll be hitting around 60 to 100 FPS depending on what you want to put your settings at, and as well as if you ever get ballsy and want to stream, the option is always there. The streaming did not seem to hinder the performance whatsoever. The 12 gigs of RAM for some reason seemed like more than enough. Obviously you could always do more RAM if you want. It's definitely expandable. I only used 3 slots, and like I said, I had it up to 36 gigs of RAM, and I guarantee you could put 48 gigs in there, which would be 6 8-gig sticks if you really want to. And if you are planning to go that route, I would definitely suggest buying 8-gig sticks. You just want to make sure that you always have 3 of whatever you're doing so you can have the triple channel memory. Like I said, for this price, now the downsides, there are downsides, don't get me wrong, but they can be fixed, especially with the motherboard that I have. The downsides, no M.2, but you can get a PCI expansion for that. No USB 3 for the front panel. Once again, you can either get an adapter for 2.0 speeds on the front panel, or you can get a PCIe adapter. There's no Wi-Fi, once again, PCIe adapter. But other than that, I mean, I guess just older BIOS is a little bit different to work around. The North Bridge definitely gets hot on these X58 motherboards. That's another thing. Once again, they get hot, but that doesn't like make it not work, so it's still good. Other than that, there's really not a lot of downsides to using these motherboards, other than the fact that you are just using generally something that's older hardware. And when it comes to something that uses single core, single thread performance, like for instance Overwatch at very low settings, or Dota at very low settings, you're definitely going to notice that, hey, I can't max out the FPS at 300, or I mean, maybe you can in some games, but it really depends. But other than that, I mean, 250 versus 300, you're not going to notice that difference. So overall, I would definitely pay for something like this. Obviously, I did pay for something like this. I would definitely recommend, if you can find yourself an X58 motherboard, that you go ahead and pick it up, as long as it's cheap. Don't pay $200 for it, because then it's obviously not worth it. But if you can find these motherboards for, I would say, under $60 for a good X58 motherboard, definitely go out and buy it. Then hit up eBay, find yourself a X5650, and you know, for 10-20 bucks, grab that bad boy. Then just basically try to find yourself some cheap RAM. So that would be my suggestion. If not, there's other options. Maybe I'll make a video talking about the other options, because of the recent release of all these new Intel CPUs. Haswell's definitely looking like a very good buy, as well as some of the Sandy Bridge processors as well. But overall, nothing really beats these Xeons. Like I said, for streaming, for gaming, this thing literally tanked through all of it. It was like I was using, you know, a system that wasn't 10 years old. It was kind of ridiculous. So you guys go ahead, chill out, thumbs me up, thumbs me down, or don't thumbs me at all, or comment, or talk shit on how you could make a better system for $400, or how you found a 1070 for $20 cheaper than I could find it. My deals are ass. Do whatever you guys want. This won't be the last video. This is just the first of me coming back, except I'm still sick, so my voice is all raspy. But you know, I'm getting better. It's been like a week of just having a cold, so getting better, making more videos. Another budget build's coming out. I don't know what it's going to be around. Don't ask me, because I don't know. But I will catch you guys later, and this video is going to be really long.